Morning, apologies for the background noise, washing machine's on. Okay, so this morning we're going to have another go at making some macarons. We're going to make some matcha macarons. So matcha, for those you can't remember, is green tea or green tea powder. So essentially you're going to want your almond flour, icing sugar, matcha powder, egg white, granulated or caster sugar, some egg white powder, but that's optional. Okay, and when we come to do the filling, you're going to want some more icing sugar, some butter, and a little pinch of matcha powder. And we're also going to partly coat these in white chocolate at the very end. Assuming it'll work out to get to that far. So, just like last time, what we're going to do is we're going to put the almond flour and the icing sugar into the blender, and we're going to blitz it a little bit to get it nice and fine. Okay, now in front of me here I've also got a pan of water on, and that's where we're going to prepare the sugar, caster sugar and egg whites. Now that's coming up to the boil. You want it so that when you put your bowl in there where you're going to do your mixing, the bowl is not in contact with the water. Okay, because we don't actually want to cook the egg, we just want to warm it through. So I'm just going to turn the heat off on that, put my bowl back over, I'll put it there because it's a bit down at the bottom, and we'll get going. Right, so into our food processor, I've got here 105 grams of almond flour. Okay, so in that goes. Don't know where to put anything. Put it back down. And then I've got 105 grams of icing sugar. In that goes. Try not to make a mess everywhere with it. And then I've got, how many grams is that? 3 grams of green tea powder, matcha powder. Okay, in that goes. So then I'll put my lid on. And if you remember last time, the icing sugar still escaped from this thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to decide to stop working. Okay, so I'm going to find out what's gone on wrong here, and then I'm just going to blitz it together, and we'll be then ready to do the sugar syrup. Right, well, just decided to be a bit temperamental. This worked fine now. So what I've done is I've given that a bit of a blitzing. I'm just going to shove that out of the way, and now I'm going to want my hand whisk. Okay, so I'll just get that plugged in, ready to go. Now we've got our bowl here, which I'm just going to put the heat back on, and into this bowl we're going to put the, how many grams is it? How many grams of it? 100 grams of caster sugar. Okay, and then we've got about 3 grams of egg white powder. Like I said, that is optional. Okay, so that goes in there. I'm just going to put that on, and then you're going to want 100 grams of egg whites. Okay, so I'm just going to let this get up to start boiling. It's almost there, and then we'll add the next bit. So the egg white powder is in there. I was going to turn that off to be able to talk to you and realise I need to turn this off. So what we're doing is we're just trying to get all that sugar dissolved into the egg white. Okay, so I'm going to go back and do that for a bit more. Okay, and then when that's all in there, we will carry on. One way we can test it is basically we just feel some of it in between our fingers, and if it feels grainy, then the sugar isn't all dissolved. In this case, this doesn't feel like that. So I'm now going to take that off of the heat. Okay, I'll take that out of there. Let's get that out of away, so it's not in the way. So, what we're now going to do is we're going to transfer that to a bigger bowl because we want to better whisk it up. Okay, so I've got a nice big bowl and we're going to be adding this stuff to it as well. Okay, so in that goes in there. We'll just make sure we've got all of that in there. And then I'm going to get ready to get the lid off of that and ready to go. So I'm all ready to get it ready for that. Before we do that, we need to whisk this up. So we start on low and we get it whisking, and then as it's starting to like get like a meringue, we increase the speed for a little bit longer. Now we don't want to overdo it, okay, but on the other hand we want it so it's starting to peak. So we're getting some bigger bubbles forming, which is what we're looking for. And they're getting more persistent. So now we up the speed a bit. So, I'm whisking. Okay, so one thing you don't want to do is over whisk it, and I think this is getting to that point where it's not going to get any stiffer. Now that could be because I've got a little bit of grease in the bowl. It could simply be there's a little bit of yolk, but we're getting peaks. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is we're going to take the blitzed almond flour, icing sugar and matcha powder, and we're going to tip that into there, and now we're just going to gently fold the two together. Now this is again where we don't want to overdo it, okay, we don't want to knock all that air out, so I would suggest you go round a few times and then cut through and then round, gently just folding it together. And we're going to keep doing that, keep checking on it, because we don't want to overdo it like I said, but equally we need to make sure we get that all mixed together. And it's a bit easy with the green in it, because obviously when it's all white sometimes it's difficult to tell whether it's all gone through, all mixed in neatly. So I'm just going to keep doing this until we've got it all blended together. So previously I've gone through and I've drawn out my circles with a small cookie cutter. I'm making them smaller this time, okay, you can see how small they are. And just like last time, I'm just going to take some dabs of meringue so that I can stick my paper down without being a pain in coming up. Okay, now this should make about 22 macaron sandwiches, if you like. So anticipate you're going to get at least 40 out. Okay, so I'm just going to get these stuck down and then we'll get onto the piping. Because this is quite runny and I've got a wide nozzle at the end, this is where really if you've got more than one person it helps, okay? Because what we want to do is transfer, and what I might do for this actually is I might use a different spoon that's a bit easier to handle it. Like I say, I've got the nozzle folded over at the end because otherwise it could just all run out, okay? So I'm just going to now transfer the contents into the piping bag. So we've got all that in there, and just like before, what we're going to do is we're going to pipe vertically, bit of pressure. When we get to our size, we just lift off and I'm just going to carry on like this till I've got them all done. So there you have it. So the next trick, give them a banging. Remember, we want to knock all the air out of them. There's quite a few air bubbles in this. And then a final little trick is I'm just going to go through, and any obvious air bubbles, I'm just going to prick them and smooth it over, and then we're going to leave it. And actually, I've discovered the problem before when they start cracking, and I said, well, I wonder if it's my oven. It's actually not. It's you're not giving it long enough for the skin to form over the top. So we're going to put these by probably for at least an hour to get that nice skin over the top, and that should then prevent them cracking when you cook them. So I'm just going to check the air bubbles, and then I'll catch you in an hour or so. Now at that point, of course, because they're going in the oven, we want our oven at about 160. So obviously before we're ready for that, we need to come put the oven on. Okay, so these are about a good hour and a half. When you touch them, they're very quite dry on the outside. Now you might have noticed these are a little bit more textured, and that's because this time I didn't sieve the flour even though it's been in the blender. Okay, so these will be a little bit more textured, if you like. If you don't want them like that, if you want them dead smooth, then filter it, sieve it. So anyway, these are going to go in the oven. The oven's preheated to 160. I'm going to put them in, and they're going to go probably about 20 minutes in total. But what we'll do is we'll put them in for about 5 minutes, and then I'm going to rotate the trays around, and then we'll put them back in for another 5 minutes and so on. Okay, so that's what's happening now. Okay, so they're now done, and we can try that by seeing if they're underneath. Okay, they lift off, a little bit stuck, but they lift off and they're not sticky underneath. They're a little bit brown, and I think that's the matcha powder. I didn't put an awful lot of matcha powder in it because it can be a bit overpowering and not necessarily that pleasant, hence the reason they're not that green. So all I'm doing is just loosen them off the paper, and then shortly I'm going to lift that paper off so that they cool a bit quicker, and we're just going to let them cool, and then we'll and then we'll be making the filling, which is a matcha buttercream filling. Okay, so now these are off. I've got them on the paper still because you'll see why. Let them cool. Okay. I tried one of the rejects, it was a funny shape, and nice hard outer shell, soft in the middle. So just how we want them really. So to make the buttercream, you're going to need some butter, obviously. I've got 85 grams of butter. Then I've got 125 grams of icing sugar, and then we're going to add into that a teaspoon of matcha powder. So I'm going to put that just in there for now, in with the icing sugar. Now it's up to you how much extra. If you want to put more in, you can do. But remember what I said, it's not to everybody's taste. It's a bit overpowering. Okay, but before we add that into here, we're just going to cream the butter for about a minute. And when that's sort of creamed up, we'll put the icing sugar and matcha powder in. So I've tipped the powders in there, and this is where we now get a bloody snowstorm. So I'm just going to continue, blend all that together. Now, if it's a bit too dry, we will add some milk, okay? Couple of teaspoons of milk, tablespoons of milk, but what we don't want to do is make it too wet. So the idea being, if this looks like it's going to be too dry, chuck in a tablespoon of milk, try it again, still too dry, add another tablespoon of milk. If on the other hand you found it was just too wet to start with, then chuck some more icing sugar in. Right, so I ended up putting about a tablespoon and a half of milk into it. So it's quite thick, but obviously not runny. Okay, and also use spatula to scrape down the sides because a lot of it stuck around the sides. The sugar wasn't going to get blended in. So these are still perhaps a little warm. Okay, well actually they're probably all right. So you're going to need your piping bag, same size nozzles used to make these. Okay, and what we're going to do is just try and pair them up, if you like, size wise. So even though we use that template, there are some of them are different sizes. So I'm just going to set them out, ready to start piping. Right, so what we're going to do is we're going to basically pipe, dollop in the middle, squeeze on the top, and I'm just going to put them back over there for a bit. Okay, so it's just a matter of going through. Dollop of the matcha buttercream, powering them up, and then we're going to do a final finish with some white chocolate. Okay, so we've got 21 total macarons out of that, and now what I've got is some white chocolate, and I'm just going to melt this down in the microwave. Okay, and then when it's just melted, so the lumps have gone, we're going to partially dip each one. Okay, so we've melted down the chocolate, and what we do is let's create a little bit of room on here. A bit of buttercream there. So what we do is we pick up one of our macarons and we half dip to a third dip. Okay, and then just lay it down to set. Now the unfortunate problem is, of course, it's probably going to stick to parchment paper, but that's why we left the paper there, so that we don't get a mess everywhere else. So all I'm doing is going along, half dipping, let the excess drain off, and then putting it back onto the paper just to set. Okay, and then we'll have one final finishing touch. Okay, so they're not quite set yet, but they're getting there. So I've got a small amount of match powder here, and all I'm going to do is a little finishing touch. I'm just going to sprinkle a tiny bit on top of each one. Most of this will probably just fall off. Some of it stick to the chocolate, just to give it that nice little finishing touch. In hindsight, I think I made the buttercream a bit too wet, although it didn't look like it. When I went to pick them up to dunk them, the buttercream was tending to squelch a little bit out the sides. So nothing wrong with that, just looks a bit messy, that's all. So there we go, there are our matcha macarons.